that in 2014, the reason that Hadi was forced from power, it wasn't the Houthis, it was the people of Yemen rising up when he tried to impose an IMF fuel subsidy cut against the Yemeni people. It was these austerity measures which provoked the Yemeni people to rise up in revolution in 2011 and 2014. And the Houthis, they were able to use that to their own advantage and stage a coup. But now we have to see that these centers of power, these financial powers, they're also in the White House. And we have to oppose them too. And we have to see where support for this genocidal war in Yemen is coming from. So first up to speak here is going to be Paul Atwood, a member of the Veterans for Peace Medley Butler Brigade. He also taught war and U.S. foreign policy at UMass Boston for 37 years. Give it up for Paul Atwood.
Thank you. So I speak today as a veteran for peace and from our intimate knowledge of militarism and war. War is the ultimate racket, and this scam has been the American way of life since the beginning. War will also be the end of any way of life if we continue on the current path. We are here today to end the war against Yemen and draw attention to the colossal catastrophe that American policy is visiting upon that small country. Yet we should also not forget Syria, Libya, Iraq, Somalia, and Afghanistan, nor should we ignore the growing danger of conflict with Iran, Russia, and China. Few today recall that the United States has been intervening in Yemen since the JFK presidency. The reason is simple: oil and the strategic protection of that oil and its profits by American corporations and their Saudi allies. While the U.S. public is no longer dependent upon Saudi oil, the fact is that American oil corporations are. We always hear that U.S. policy defends American interests. Those interests are not ours, but are the profit interests of giant corporations. Nor should we forget that since the end of World War II, the U.S. corporate economy has also come to depend on permanent production of weapons for permanent war, or at least the proclaimed threat of war. The public is bombarded every day with a constant drumbeat of threats from every direction. Raytheon, based here in Massachusetts, is one of the prime recipients of the guaranteed riches our government provides to these merchants of death at taxpayer expense. As citizens, we have a right and an obligation to judge whether our hard-earned taxes are devoted to building a humane and equitable society here at home, or on the waste of colossal military spending that results in our unjust and manifestly unequal society. Profits are so high for Raytheon's weapons of mass destruction that our own legislature ensures that the Commonwealth's Employees Retirement Fund is invested in this purveyor of death and destruction. Now finally that the Trump administration is gone, we have the best opportunity to demand that President Biden sever support for the Saudi war in Yemen. We must also insist on the reversal of Pompous Pompeo's designation of the Houthis as terrorists, since this will only intensify the atrocious suffering and misery of the Yemeni people. And we must insist that Raytheon's delivery of the weapons of death to Saudis must cease. Finally, we must also begin a campaign in Massachusetts to withdraw any state retirement funding from Raytheon, the quintessential merchant of death. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Give it up again for Paul Atwood. We know that veterans need to be at the forefront of this struggle to end our endless wars. Now, many of you may be asking yourselves, if this war is so unpopular across the political spectrum, I rarely meet anyone who says they're supportive in the least of this conflict. So why does it continue? It continues because of the words of the man who inspired Paul's Veterans for Peace chapter. The most decorated Marine in United States history, General Smedley Butler. You know what he said? War is a racket. There's a lot of money to be made off of blood and death. Not for the people of this country, but for executives like Larry Fink from BlackRock. And they will continue to take all of the wealth of our society, in fact of the whole world, and put it into the hands of a few until the people rise up and make a demand. We're not going to take it anymore. So Yemen, ending this brutal war in Yemen is only the first step to taking our government back so that it is a government of the people and not a government that exists to create wealth for the few. So our next speaker, well, you know him already because he's also been emceeing, is Chance Charlie. He's a student at Boston University. He's an active member of the Raytheon Anti-War Campaign. He's a member of United Against War and Militarism and is the founder of BU Students Against Imperialism. Give it up for Chance, everyone.
All right, so as Brian said, war is a racket. And with BlackRock especially, we really have to pay some close attention here. Because BlackRock is one of the biggest companies, these hedge fund managing kind of investment corporations. It's one of the biggest ones in the world. And I wrote down just a few statistics to give people a little bit of a sense of how much power and wealth this company has concentrated under their hands. They have over $5 trillion in assets under their management. That's a huge amount of money. And of course we can see all the evil around the world. BlackRock, they're not just interested in military contracts and this sort of thing. They're invested in all sorts of different terrible things around the world. The deforestation of the Amazon, different terrible like US-backed imperialist sort of schemes in third world countries that are destroying the livelihoods of peasants and driving them off their land. This is the type of system we live under, where these corporations rake in trillions, literally trillions of dollars off of the oppression, blood, sweat, and tears of the people of the world. But with BlackRock, we can see just how close this connection to the military is, and just how close this connection to Saudi Arabia is. So for example, BlackRock is the third largest shareholder in Raytheon. We've heard a lot about Raytheon. They're one of the biggest companies selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. So they're the third largest in Raytheon. They're the fourth largest investor in Lockheed Martin. And under both of those two companies, they have about $10 billion invested. But that's not all. They also have different, what are known as ETFs, exchange traded funds. And these are collections of stocks and bonds that they sell day in and day out. And one of these specifically that BlackRock manages is just full of military companies and companies producing nuclear weapons. So why do I mention all of this? Well, it's not just because of this clear example of a military-industrial complex, this clear example of how the financial elite are profiting hand over fist from the blood of the people of Yemen. But we see that with their CEO, Larry Fink, he's a representative of this ruling elite, this capitalist class, which is profiting from this destruction. And what does he say as a representative of this section of the ruling elite? He says, we're fine with Saudi Arabia. We don't care that they murder journalists. We don't care that they drop bombs and blockade whole countries and cause genocides and famines. He instead of stepping back from these remarks, after the Jamal Khashoggi killing, which brought international outcry to Saudi Arabia, he decided to open an office in Riyadh for BlackRock. But what's also important to see, like Brian said, is that there are also sections of the same ruling elite, the same class, which are moving against this. And we can use that to our advantage. We saw how a war powers resolution was passed. But why are these things being passed today? Because some sections of the ruling elite think that it's no longer in their interest to support Saudi Arabia. Instead, they might want to shift to the UAE and focus more on sponsoring the UAE instead of Saudi Arabia, or potentially even throwing a bone to the Houthis as a way to reignite the Iran deal. These politicians, these financial oligarchs, they don't care about the people of Yemen. Even when they say they're opposed to the war, we have to be incredibly skeptical. We have to say and look clearly at what their interests are. Because unless we see what these interests are, we're not going to be able to fully end what is happening in Yemen, the foreign intervention there, because it goes far deeper than just Saudi bombs. It goes far deeper than just famine. It goes to the heart of why Yemen is the poorest country in the Middle East. It is not poor because the people there are poor. The people of Yemen have an incredibly rich history. It's one of the oldest civilizations in the world. The country of Yemen is poor because it's been looted systematically by big countries like the United States and Saudi Arabia. It's been looted by companies like BlackRock. And so we have to take this moment right now where it's on the table that we can end significantly the U.S.'s involvement in Yemen. We have to take this moment to really stand in solidarity with the people of Yemen. That Yemen deserves a right to determine its own future. Yemen has a right to self-determination. This is not something that can be decided by Saudi Arabia. The future of Yemen is not something that can be decided by the United States, or by the UAE, or by Iran, or even by the United Nations. This is a right that belongs entirely to the people of Yemen. And so I want to end it there. End the war in Yemen now! End the war in Yemen!
So thank you for staying with us on this chilly day. We're going to gather our stuff up, and our next destination is the United Arab Emirates Consulate, just around the corner right here in downtown Boston. So we're bringing it right to their doorstep. In just one moment, we'll take off. Thank you so much for being with us.